From New York to our Bloomberg television watchers all around the world, I'm David Weston, and this is a special edition of Balance of Power covering the unrest in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. today, as pro-Trump demonstrators, really rioters, took to the streets and ultimately charged Capitol Hill and the Capitol building itself, invading the Senate chamber while they were trying to tally up the Electoral College votes. For a review of what happened today in this very extraordinary, tumultuous, and deeply disturbing day, we welcome now our colleague, Laura Davison. So, Laura, from your perspective in Washington, what happened?
It was really an incredible and historic, not in a good way, kind of day. The proceedings this afternoon at 1 o'clock kicked off as expected. The House and Senate were in the House chamber. There was an objection to the Arizona results, and the two chambers broke up, and they went to start debating. And just as the debate kicked off, Mitch McConnell gave this really fiery speech on the Senate floor saying, we need to move past this. The election has been decided. Joe Biden has won. It is not our place to overturn the will of the people. Really, as he was saying those words, protesters started storming the Capitol. They were able at several points to get into the building and really just overwhelmed the U.S. Capitol Police Force. There were several who were inside the chamber on the Senate floor, yelling that Trump had won the election. There was a standoff, an armed standoff over on the House side, and there are still protesters, in the building roaming around. The U.S. Capitol Police Force, which has been reinforced by National Guard troops, state troopers, Secret Service, are still working to secure the building, and really the whole process today has been put on hold and raises just a ton of questions, not only of what happens procedurally going forward in the next couple days and weeks, but really just sort of how we think about our U.S. Capitol building as a building, as well as how the two parties and Republicans in particular think about what our democracy is.
So let's talk about that Capitol building, which is such an important building for all of us in the United States of America. Do we have any sense? We saw video of damage being done, windows broken, people breaking in. There was at least one report of a possible casualty. You referred to an armed standoff on the House side. We saw some still photos of that. Do we have any idea of injuries?
Pardon, what the composure is?
Casualties, people who were injured during the demonstration.
There have been reports of one casualty. There were lots of sort of broken, windows and doors and those sorts of things, tear gas. But so far, only one report of casualties. We are heading into the nighttime hours here. There's a curfew imposed by the city of D.C. Starting in about an hour. But security forces are very concerned that violence could escalate, either on the streets or, if they're unable to secure the building. As nightfall comes, that's a big concern. One sort of factor, on the other hand, is that a lot of the people who came in for these demonstrations are on buses that are scheduled to leave this evening. That is giving D.C. and Capitol Police Forces some hope that things are sort of on the downward side versus ramping up for more violence.
Okay, Laura, thank you so much for that report. That's Laura Davison, our colleague in Washington. Now we're going to turn to a man who has a very difficult job today, maybe every day, but particularly today. He's the man charged with keeping law and order in Washington, D.C. He's Karl Racine. He's the Attorney General of Washington, D.C. So, Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for being with us. Give us your sense of how things are on the streets of Washington right now.
Well, I think it's, as Laura reported quite well, what you saw today was action taken not by protesters, but by folks who were intent on violating law. David, as you know, in DC, we're used to having protesters. They bring signs, they chant, from time to time to get close to the police line, and from time to time have to be pushed back. But never has a protester in the District of Columbia, led by a group of people encouraged by the President of the United States, actually gone through the police line and into one of our most cherished democratic institutions, the United States Capitol. Think about this. Senators and congresspeople were huddled down onto the ground, ushered into tunnels with gas masks on in order to evade violence. This is America. And now is the time for us to calmly, resolutely tell the President of the United States to demand his supporters to leave peacefully now.
Now, the President of the United States actually issued a video a short time ago, as you know, saying, please go home. Although he did say it was a fraudulent election, that it was a landslide and people were stealing from it. It never happened before. But he said, now it's time to go home, saying, by the way, at the end of it, I love you, to the people that, as you say, really are rioters. Talking about those people who are much more than protesters, you're entirely right about that. Do we know, are they still in the Capitol, some of them?
Well, I'm limited by my television set and my team that is embedded in the command center of the Metropolitan Police Department. And what I know from the television set and my team reports that are literally coming out every 5 minutes is that the process of getting those folks out of the Capitol is underway, but they still are on the Capitol grounds. And as to President Trump's comments, think about that. What he's indicated again is that the cause, according to him, is a stolen election. Well, the United States Supreme Court, countless other courts have found that there was no theft of the election. Even many Republicans are telling you that there was no theft of the election. The president has criticized the United States Supreme Court. That's a conservative court. He's criticized now his vice president, when we know the common denominator is the president of the United States, who's acting recklessly and selfishly after his own interest and putting people in our institutions in harm's way. This is a sad day, as Laura commented, for the United States of America.
No question about that. You cannot be a citizen of this country and not be sad looking at those images. Give us a sense, though, was it entirely a surprise? I mean, it's a shock to see people breaking into the Capitol building in that way. At the same time, as you suggest, President Trump had called for demonstrations. He gave a speech about noontime, East Coast time, basically saying this was an illegitimate election. The next president will be illegitimate. Was it entirely surprising that this might turn violent? Were we prepared enough, or as we should have been, in the Washington's Capitol?
I think those are really fair questions that you're asking, David. Was it a surprise that the protest turned violent? I don't think we can claim surprise because the groups that came to protest, and I'm not saying every single protester, but there were groups that came to protest who were hell-bent on violence. There are groups that came to protest who are hate groups. They don't like people of color. They don't particularly care for folks who are immigrants, notwithstanding their contribution to the country. And they came indeed to do damage, and they did. I think there's another question to be asked, and that is, we have seen these groups. We've seen them take over the Michigan Capitol, but the United States Capitol, where we have Capitol Police and other federal authorities responsible for protecting a symbol of our democracy, I would urge you to consider that that should never be incurred upon by any protesters. Protect our democracy and rule of law. That's what makes us unique.
Give us a sense, if you can, Mr. Attorney General, of what is going on now and bringing forces together to make sure that this is brought under control and that the rioters are evicted. I understand that there's been a reaching out, not only National Guard, but also Northern Virginia Police, Maryland Police, maybe even as far away as Delaware. Can you give us a sense of what forces are being brought to bear on Capitol Hill and in the District of Columbia generally right now?
So everything that you just recited is the same that I've heard. I can't independently, confirm that. I have every good reason to believe that your reporting is correct, and that is that the neighbors of the District of Columbia, we really have a pretty close-knit neighborhood. Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. These are jurisdictions that really interact and intersect together, and they're coming to lend a hand because they could see the potential for chaos. And let me just say, some of the groups that are represented today, they create havoc during the day, they create mass violence at night. And so I'm hopeful and prayerful that that doesn't occur, but it's really at night's fall when these groups really go at it and look to hurt people, property, and symbols of our democracy.
So I'm glad you raised that, because as I calculate the time right now, we're about 50 minutes away, 50 minutes away from the curfew that Mayor Bowser's called. Do we have any indication whether that curfew will hold? As I understand it, basically, if you're non-essential, you're not supposed to be in the street doing anything as of 6 p.m. Eastern Time.
Well, that's right. And let me just reiterate that. If you're not an essential worker, and in this case, I'm talking about law enforcement, security detail, and the like, you need to be home by 6 p.m. and not be on the streets of the District of Columbia. Now, whether groups that have clearly violated the law throughout the day will all of a sudden start complying with the law is something that I frankly doubt. But I do believe that the Metropolitan Police Department and other law enforcement officers will seek to enforce the curfew in order to keep the peace. And my office will certainly prosecute folks who violate the curfew.
Mr. Attorney General, I can't thank you enough for your time on a very difficult day, a very disappointing day for all of us. That is Carl Rossini. He is the Attorney General of Washington, D.C. Of course, all of these things have effects as well in the markets, and we turn now to Taylor Riggs. And Taylor, I must say, even as we've been talking here, we have various CEOs of J.P. Morgan, of IBM coming out and condemning the violence in Washington, D.C. Have the markets reacted at all to what's going on in Washington?
You know what's interesting, David, is the markets woke up. They were indeed focused on Washington, but it was all about Georgia this morning. As it was clear that Georgia was turning blue, was the reflation, inflationary trade, record highs on all the major indices. Then, of course, around 2 or 3 p.m. when it went from a peaceful protest to going into this Capitol and storming the Capitol, you did get a little bit of a dip down in futures, but overall you're at a record high on the Dow. The S&P just 8 points away from that. Tech, of course, bearing the brunt of a sell-off today. They don't like higher rates. If we can show rates, we'll do that in a moment. You flip up the board. David, this really was the story of the day. I always look for confirmation of some of the panic that we see within the equity markets, in the bond markets. And that is what didn't move today that was surprising. You have rates higher by 11 basis points on the 10 and the 30-year yield. That is that reflationary blue wave scenario that the rate markets were reacting to in the news from this morning. Finally, let's just flip up the board because we like to go cross asset at Bloomberg again, looking for further confirmation. We know that the theme of the year has been further dollar weakness. When you get periods of panic, David, like we saw in March, you see big spikes up in dollar strength. We did not see that today. You got further dollar weakness, and you didn't see sort of the classic safe haven trade that you would typically see in big moments of panic, like yen strength, like Swissy strength relative to the euro or the dollar. So the yield and the currency markets, David, showing some calm that we would know going full circle back to the equity markets off some of the record highs that we had seen earlier in the session.
Taylor, thank you so much for that report on the markets. That's Taylor Riggs reporting on the markets on this tumultuous day. Coming up next, with the Capitol in lockdown, what happens to that tallying of the Electoral College vote? That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg. This is a special edition of Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. So the reason why the Senate and the House were in session were to count up the Electoral College votes. And now the question is, how do we get back to that? We need to have somebody appointed president by January 20, according to the Constitution of the United States. For maybe some answers, if we know some answers, we turn now to our Washington bureau chief, and he is, of course, Craig Gordon. So, Craig, what do we know about how they're going to go back to that process of some objections and some arguments and some votes?
Yeah, we've already started to see some statements from some of the senators, not too many of the ones that are involved directly in this challenge, but saying, we need to get back to the Capitol, we need to get back to work. Lindsey Graham, obviously people know, a Republican senator from South Carolina, close friend of Donald Trump, is kind of saying, supporting Joe Biden, saying, we need to make this official and move forward. Joe Manchin, a conservative Democrat from West Virginia, saying, we shouldn't let the thugs, that's his word, stop us from doing, the people's work, and let's get this going tonight. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce just has a statement out saying the same thing. So, there's definitely, I'm reluctant to make the comparison, but it kind of reminded me of when the, Congress gathered on the steps of the Capitol and saying, God bless America, where you have a kind of maybe a bit of a moment of national unity, ironic, of course, because the whole day was kind of based on a moment of disunity where you had several Republicans trying to challenge the election of Joe Biden to be the president. So who knows? Maybe there'll be some moment where people say, this has gone too far. We need to get back to work. We need to certify Joe Biden as president in time for the January 20th inauguration and move the country forward.
So Craig, you're a reporter par excellence, so I'm not going to ask you to speculate, but maybe a little bit. In this sense, you're a real student of Washington, been there for some time. It's hard for you to imagine Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, giving that same speech after what's happened that he did before. I mean, what's going to happen to the objections? Are they going to go back in whenever they get around to it and have all those objections and all those debates about whether there's a legitimate election or not a legitimate election?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and again, I don't mind speculating in the sense because I'm speculating only in the sense of it's like human nature. Like obviously Ted Cruz, you might agree with his politics, you might disagree with his politics, but I think he loves his country. I think he believes in the Constitution, and I think it might be a little hard to kind of have that same fire and brimstone he had this morning in kind of challenging the results of an election that I think we can all pretty much agree by now has been decided. Joe Biden won by 6 million votes and 100 some odd, electoral college votes. On the other hand, Ted Cruz, part of his speech was like, look, we are afforded this opportunity to raise questions about the integrity of the election by the Constitution. There's a process to challenge the electors, to question the electors, to look at the process. He, of course, is calling for an emergency 10-day, panel to study whether there were any irregularities in the vote. Again, that seems like a little bit more of a kind of a fig leaf than maybe a totally serious proposal in terms of something that's going to actually change the result of the election. But, you might see a Ted Cruz say, this country is built on, honest disagreements and the First Amendment right to express them. What we saw earlier in this chamber was not that. That's protest. That's violence. That's different. But, I am going to exercise my right. But I agree, to use the phrase, it's kind of a bad look for the Republicans right now to kind of take this back. They were talking about doing 3 states, 2 to 3 to 4 hours of debate for each state. We had all been planning to be here up until about 2 in the morning. If they were to restart this tonight somehow, you could be talking about literally watching the sunrise, and I'm not sure anyone has the stomach for that right now.
Yeah, it certainly sounds right. Craig, it's always a delight to have you with us. That's Craig Gordon. He's our Washington bureau chief. So Craig just said that it's a bad look right now for the Republicans. Let's go to somebody who knows the Republicans terribly well. Rick Davis. He's our political contributor who ran John McCain's campaign, as well as so many others. He's a partner in Stone Court Capital. So how do you put the Republican Party back together again? Because we focus on the Republicans because, in fairness, we saw that even in the debate in the Senate that we saw, it was Republican against Republican with Mitch McConnell against Ted Cruz.
That's exactly right, David. I think that one thing that needs a clear distinction is that this is a Donald Trump-inspired protest, a Donald Trump-inspired, both inside and outside the Capitol. So Ted Cruz is not speaking for the Republican Party when he protests the electors. He's speaking for Donald Trump. The protesters on the grounds of the Capitol and in the Capitol aren't violating our institution there because they are good standing Republicans who support everybody on the ticket. It's because they're Trump supporters. And in essence, Trump encouraged them to go and do exactly what they're doing earlier this morning when he met with this crowd of rioters in front of the White House. So if you read Mitch McConnell's remarks today, where he first introduced the Senate deliberation on the discussion around the Arizona electors, he was very clear. It basically was a talk to the Republican caucus, and he was very clear that he didn't support this initiative, that he thought it was walking down a very dangerous path, not just for the party, but for our democracy. And you always used to use a certain line, which was what's good for our country should be good for our party, and we should never do anything in our party that isn't good for the country. This is a big departure from that. And so out of this will come a very serious debate. As you remarked before with Craig, Joe Biden will be sworn in as president, and the Republican Party will have a post-Trump look at itself in the mirror, and there will be a very, very difficult debate as to how you manage forward and who becomes the leader of the party. With the Senate going Democratic, which appears to be a certainty now, Mitch McConnell would have been, as majority leader, our top elected Republican in the country. Now we don't have that. And so a vacuum has been created not just by Donald Trump leaving office, but Mitch McConnell becoming a minority leader in the next Congress. And so there'll be a rush of activity. It's probably one of the reasons Ted Cruz is doing what he's doing. Power grabs come in many shapes and forms. And so I think that we are in a very, very difficult period. Is the old grand old party is going to look at itself after today and say, did we aid and abet an attack on the Capitol by the rhetoric of people who are office holders in the Republican Party?
I also wonder, Rick, as some news is crossing just right now with Facebook coming out with a statement saying the violent protests in the Capitol today are a disgrace. We prohibit incitement and calls for violence on our platform. They're going to remove such content. What does this do to tech, to social media, and the role that it may have played in this as a practical matter? It already was not having an easy time with either Republicans or Democrats. Is there going to be renewed focus now on the role of social media in political discourse?
No question, David. This has been an active and robust conversation for many years now. It was at the core of President Trump's efforts to try and get rid of Section 230 in the Defense Authorization Act, that he was unsuccessful at doing at the last minute. But both Republicans and Democrats agree that social media has been a platform for hate speech for some time, and that without government regulation, the industry has not really done enough to improve the political discourse or the cultural and human discourse on their platforms. So I think you're going to see a bipartisan meeting of the minds around what is going to be the official government position on how to regulate speech on these social media platforms. Because extremism is not just found in the Middle East. You're looking at it on television tonight. The people who are attacking the Capitol and flying the Confederate flag inside the Capitol today are extremists, and those things do not help our country grow and prosper.
Very well said. Thank you so much to Rick Davis of Stonecrow Capital. He's our political contributor here at Bloomberg. In the meantime, almost lost in the rounding in all this was the second senatorial race was declared in Georgia. So now both seats went to the Democrats. And for a report on that, we turn to our intrepid reporter on the scene in Georgia, Emily Wilkins. Emily, so it's official.
It is official now. Democrats have won both Senate seats in Georgia. That means that Democrats will control the Senate for at least the next 2 years. It's going to be tight. It's a 50-50 split, but Democrats do have control as Vice President Kamala Harris can do any tiebreaker votes for the Democrats. This is a huge victory. It wasn't.
No, go ahead, Emily, because the thing I really want to talk about is there any possibility of a recount?
There is a bit of a possibility for a recount. We are still watching votes come in. The key statistic to look for at this point is 0.5%. If the candidates have that margin or a smaller margin between them, either of them can ask for a recount and Georgia will do it. However, at this point, neither race is within that margin. Both the Democrats have a larger margin on their Republican opponents than that. Of course, we still have more votes coming in at this point, and Senator David Perdue has promised to take any sort of legal action to make sure that all votes are counted. So we might see this play out over the next several weeks.
Well, so we're talking about legal action again, Emily. I had not heard that before. So we might do this all again and have some lawsuits brought?
We might. This is something that Perdue's team hasn't given a lot of details on at this point. It was a statement that he put out a little bit earlier this morning. So we're going to be watching those campaigns to see what they decide to do. Obviously, the news in the Capitol has overshadowed things a bit today. Kelly Loeffler was up there initially to cast a vote. She is still there. So we're going to be watching this story play out. But at this point, we've heard Georgia election officials say that this race, it didn't have any fraud. It went very smoothly, and they believe that everything we've seen at this point is legitimate.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's been terrific reporting you've done down there, Emily, for a long time now. We really appreciate all your reporting from the state of Georgia, from Emily Wilkins. And as I say, now it's official. It'll be 50-50 split in the Senate between Republicans and Democrats with, of course, the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. She will be casting the deciding vote, but it'll be a very close balance, without any doubt. Coming up, we're going to be talking with Representative Joyce Beatty, Democrat of Ohio, who was actually in the Capitol during the disturbance. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace.
That was President Donald J. Trump addressing the riots that have taken place on Capitol Hill today in a recorded statement that came out just a little over an hour ago now. We turn now to our White House correspondent. He is Mario Parker. For the White House reaction, give us a sense within the White House, Mario, insofar as you know it, about what their reaction is to this. Do they know what their reaction is?
Well, it's the White House's reaction to it so far has been less than sure-footed. The president, as you played the clip, released a message sometime well after the Capitol had been breached. And the message, again, appeared to be underwhelming or insufficient to really address the magnitude of what's happening. He still repeated some of his unsubstantiated claims that the election was stolen from him. And so those type of statements do little to calm down a crowd that is so worked up right now that it's essentially stormed the U.S. Capitol.
Yeah, the president said, I know how you feel, now go home in peace. But at the same time, we now have a statement, according to the Associated Press, from the Washington, D.C. police chief, saying at least 5 weapons have been recovered and at least 13 people have been arrested so far in the rioting that has gone on. This certainly is inconsistent with what President Trump said he was trying to accomplish.
Right, absolutely. And it's inconsistent with some of the president's rhetoric this past summer and throughout his campaign on backing police, saying, essentially denouncing violence, in the wake of some of the racial unrest this past summer. And you're seeing in the Twitter sphere, some of the president's most ardent supporters kind of urge him and both his supporters that are on the ground here in the Capitol to just calm down. The former White House communications director, Alyssa Farah, just came out with a tweet where she says that the election was not stolen, that they lost fair and square, that there were some instances of fraud, but nothing of the magnitude that the president has claimed. And so you're seeing some of the president's allies try to at least calm down this situation.
Okay, Mario, thank you so much for being with us tonight. That is Mario Parker. He is Bloomberg White House reporter. I want to turn to somebody now who has served in the White House, this White House of George Herbert Walker Bush, as an aide to the president. He is the Reverend Joe Watkins from Philadelphia. So, Reverend Joe, thank you so much for being with us. I mean,
Thanks,
you
David.
served under a Republican president, but a Republican president that I dare say would be appalled is too weak a word for, I think, what President Bush 41's reaction would be tonight.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Bush 41, Bush 43. This is a very, very difficult night for all of us as Americans to watch. I mean, this is the greatest country in the world, the home of the free, the land of the brave, a country where power passes peacefully from one administration to the next, where when presidents lose elections, they welcome their successor as President George H.W. Bush did, and they wish that person the best for the sake of the country, because it's not about us, it's about the country. And this is really difficult to see. I thought that Mitch McConnell gave the best speech that he's given, certainly in recent years, when he spoke today on the floor of the Capitol before all of his colleagues, when he said, this is bigger than us, it's about the country, about the democracy. And that's what it's about today. This is really very, very difficult for all of us to watch.
You make a really important point, I think, Joe, which is we've tended in this country in recent years to think of it as Republican or Democrat, left or right. This issue really cuts across that. I thought that the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, was actually lecturing his own caucus to a large degree, people in his own caucus, and really remonstrating with them, saying, you're doing the wrong thing here. So it's not simply a Republican issue. It's a broader issue in our society.
Absolutely. Mitch McConnell was just trying to call the members of his own caucus to the better angels of their nature, to do the right thing, to not think about what's politically expedient, how you can grab hold of the incumbent president's base and make that base your own, but think about the country, what it takes to move the country forward. And I liked what he said. I thought it was so appropriate, so timely. I just wish that everybody had heard it and that everybody had responded accordingly to what he said.
So what is the way forward for the Republican Party in your judgment?
Well, we've got to regroup, certainly, and the Republican Party has to figure out if we're still the party of Abraham Lincoln, if we care about the importance of fiscal responsibility, and that we also care about the direction of the country, about Americans who are hurting the most, as well as Americans who are in business and who may be prospering. We've got to be a party that is the party of all Americans, and that is more diverse than it has been in the past. And certainly more willing to lead when it comes to matters that ordinary Americans care about. And I just hope that this can be the party of Abraham Lincoln, who united the country in a very, very difficult time. Hopefully, this can be a party going forward that unites this country in a time when we're so fractured. And it's going to take really, again, the strongest voices and the people with the best hearts in our party to step forward now and to be heard, so that others can follow their lead.
The best hearts. I also wonder, Joe, if it's going to require some courage on someone's part, because it certainly appears to the outside world right now that some people within the Republican Party have been concerned about alienating the core Trump base, who does not seem to be too inclined to change their mind on things.
Very, very well said, David. I think that this is a time for courage, and it's not for political expediency, not for self-interest, but for public interest, especially the American public interest. And that calls for saying what needs to be said now at this difficult time, and speaking truth to those people who have chosen, for whatever reason, to storm the steps of the Capitol. And not just to tell them to go home, but to tell them that they have to respect the rule of law, and that they have to respect the outcome of these American elections, and that they have to respect the will of the American people, just as they want their will to be respected. When Americans vote and they decide on a leader, our responsibility as Americans is to accept that, and then to be rooting for the new leader of the country to succeed. We may not agree on every issue. We may disagree, and that's why we have a Congress where people can air their disagreements. But at the same time, we ought never descend into mobs of people armed storming the Capitol of the United States. And I wrote this little book, David, this 30-page book called The New PC, Practical Consideration. And all I say in the book is that how we talk to each other, how we treat each other in politics and in daily life matters. We've got to treat each other like we care about each other, like we love each other. Even if we don't agree, we've got to listen to each other and love each other. And I'm hoping and praying that that's the direction that we take. I'm certainly going to be an advocate for what I've been talking about for the last few years.
So, Joe, I also wonder whether that message is important for both sides of the aisle as a practical matter. It's going to be very easy for some Democrats right now to point a finger and say this is a Republican issue. It's also going to be terribly important, I think, if Joe Biden means what he says, and I believe him, that he wants to be a president for all the people, to reach across and really be understanding and accommodating to Republicans and conservatives.
I think President-elect Biden is showing tremendous restraint, and that's just the right attitude at this time of division in the country. It's whoever is president, and it's Joe Biden who will be the next president of the United States, that person has to bring us together and be the president for all the people, whether they voted for him or didn't vote for him, and move us forward that way. And not be so concerned about their political future. And I think that Joe Biden is not concerned about that as much as he's concerned about moving the country forward. But he's got to move us forward, and he's got to bring us together. And I like everything that he said so far in that vein. He's not looking to retaliate. He's just looking to bring people together, to cull the best ideas from both sides, and to move the country forward. And I hope that spirit kind of takes a central place with Democrats and Republicans. How do we move the country forward? What are the best ideas? How do we get that done and get it done? How do we have dialogue that's useful and helpful to the American people without being destructive to democracy?
We can all hope. I'm sad to say that it looks a little harder tonight than it did this morning, but maybe this can be turned into something good. Thank you so much to the Reverend Joe Watkins, former aide to George Herbert Walker Bush, our 41st president. Coming in the meantime, there was something else that happened today. The second seat in the Senate went to a Democrat in the state of Georgia. Coming up next, we're going to talk with Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from the state of Ohio about the significance of that move. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television.
this hour, our democracy is under unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty.
That was President-elect Biden, Joe Biden, speaking just a short time ago, addressing, of course, the riots on Capitol Hill by some pro-Trump forces. We now are going to welcome somebody who was in the building during that assault. She is Democratic Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from the state of Ohio. First of all, I need to ask, how are you, Congresswoman?
Well, at this time, I'm doing a lot better. As you can imagine, a few hours ago, it was very unsettling. Although we knew or had heard that there would be protesters here, I don't think anyone imagined that they would be able to not only get inside, but to take over the Capitol steps, to scale the walls of the United States Capitol, get into Speaker Pelosi's office and take over both chambers. You know, we heard gunshots being fired. We saw glass being broken. So members were barricaded in offices, escorted off the floor, tear gas masks were provided. I'm so proud of the members of Congress. They acted immediately for the safety of themselves and the staff. I had brand new staff with me. Today was the first meeting of the Congressional Black Caucus for the 117th session. So, you know, we are still waiting for full clearance. But when you think about as many protests as many of us have witnessed and marched in and participated in, it was a different day today when I think about photos that I look back on when Black Lives Matter came to the Capitol and how it was lined up with officers and they weren't allowed to come to the steps. And then today, we watch people scaling the walls and climbing up to the windows and coming with tools and things that could be harmful to the police officers. But it gives me pause to wonder, how did they get through metal doors? How did they get into the Capitol? How could they be in the Capitol and we had footage of them moving through statuary halls, moving through cannons, and yet they weren't escorted, arrested? Where were all of the vans and the trucks to arrest them? It gives you great discomfort that they were able to do this at this level.
So, Congressman, you were all there in order to take the tallies of the Electoral College. And, of course, there were going to be some objections and some debates, but ultimately a vote. I think we all knew how it was going to come out. Do you have any sense of when you can get back to that? We need to have those Electoral College votes tallied, as I understand it, so that Joe Biden can become the president of the United States come January 20.
Oh, absolutely. I am very comfortable that we will go back into the chambers and do the people's work. This is another thing that this president has done. He's big on getting you to reflect to or to defect to something else, thinking that he can stop us. We will stay here all night if it takes us to get safety clearance to go back in and to resume voting. I think it only energizes us more to know why we have to do this and how much opportunity and hope we can have when we have President-elect Joe Biden sworn into office on January the 20th. So I am estimating probably in another hour or so, many will go back to the chambers. Others will stay safe where we are. And then within another couple of hours, I am comfortable that we will be able to go to our offices and to proceed as planned in alphabetical order to vote and to do the people's business. Now, it may take us into the wee hours of the night, but we will do this.
So just to be clear, you believe, Congresswoman, that Congress will complete its constitutional responsibilities before it leaves that building finally to actually finalize the Electoral College vote. So we will have a definite answer before you're done.
Oh, I am absolutely confident that we will go back and vote, because if we don't, that means Trump got what he wanted. And we are bigger than that, and that's why we will build back better. That's why we will do what we have to do the people's work. We're not going to let them make us afraid to do our work. Now, we understand that we had to be barricaded and protected for safety reasons, but I can tell you, no one that's in this room with me is looking like they are afraid to go back in and do the work. Many people are bothered. Many people are upset. Many people are angry that we had to experience this and that we didn't have more protection early on, that the National Guard was not approved earlier to be here to stop those individuals who were being destructive to the United States Capitol and putting members and staff at risk.
So, Congresswoman, it's always difficult, if not impossible, to figure out the ramifications of something as profound and disturbing as we saw today. But you mentioned this is a new Congress just starting out. It's going to be a different Congress than any other, given the way you've started out, and the fact that today we had 2 Senate seats come in for the Democrats, so there'll be a tie, 50-50, to be broken presumably by Vice President-elect Kamala Harris for the Democrats. Well, how do you think this may change the course of this Congress?
Oh, I think we will definitely see a change in the course of this Congress by the mere fact that we now have the majority in all 3, the House. Today, the tie in the Senate, certainly as you know, now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris will be sitting in a very powerful seat as it relates to the Senate in breaking ties. She comes from the Senate. She'll be the vice president, and she is scholarly and ready. I think when we think about what happened today, tomorrow when we wake up, we will know that after January the 20th, it will be a new day for the people. It will be a new day where we can talk about real issues and we can get real legislation passed. We won't have to be wondering what we're going to do about voting rights and wondering what we're going to do about policing acts. We will be ready. So this afternoon will be a good day. It gives us our stamp of approval that a new day is coming, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will lead us in that new day.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Congressman. Well, I wish you all the very best, and I hope that you're right, that you can get that job done before you're done. And I'm very happy that you're in good shape. Thank you so much for being with us. That's Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, Democrat from the state of Ohio. Coming up, we're going to talk about what comes next insofar as we can see it. We're going to have Craig Gordon back, our Washington bureau chief. This is special coverage on Bloomberg Television. I'm David Weston. This is a special edition of Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. We are covering the disruption, the rioting at Capitol Hill today in Washington, D.C. And we're joined once again by our Bloomberg Washington bureau chief. He is Craig Gordon. Craig, what's happened, and I've just seen it, is a rather remarkable development, I think. As we know, President Trump, about 2 hours ago or so, taped a video plea to the rioters to say, please go home. I understand your pain. I understand it was a fraudulent election. It was a landslide for us and it was stealing for us, but still go home and be peaceful. And now we have Facebook pulling down that video, and a vice president, yes, of integrity of Facebook saying this is an emergency situation and we are taking appropriate emergency measures, including removing President Trump's video. This is pretty extraordinary, and I must say it was the prelude to that was several prominent people, including Kara Swisher out in Silicon Valley, was saying this is on your head, Facebook and Twitter, if you don't take these things down. This is pretty amazing.
No, I agree. And obviously, we all know that Donald Trump's been kind of in a war with the social media companies. He's been trying to get rid of the Section 230 protections that they have, the liability protections that did not actually go through in the past Congress, unlikely to go through in the new Democratic Congress that Joe Biden will inherit on January 20th. So it's a continuation of that. I mean, the interesting thing to me was that several people, including Joe Biden himself, said, Donald Trump needs to go on national television and try to calm the waters. Of course, it's Donald Trump, so he can't just go and make a video where he tries to calm the waters. He then has to essentially praise or at least offer comfort to these protesters, saying, yes, I know, I feel your pain, the election was stolen, it's a terrible thing. So even in, allegedly trying to calm things down, he managed to splash a little more gasoline onto the fire, and I think Facebook said enough.
And in the meantime, the AP is reporting that, in fact, the officials have declared the Capitol secure. We just talked with Joyce Beatty, the Democratic congresswoman from Ohio, and she said, as far as she's concerned, they're going to keep going tonight, however long it takes. They're going to get back into those chambers, and they're going to go back, and they're going to review those Electoral College votes and get it done. Is that plausible?
Yeah, we've been starting to hear some of the same things. Our terrific House reporters, Billy House and Eric Wasson. There definitely is a mood among the lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, to try to essentially not let mob rule, drive them out of the Capitol and drive them away from doing their jobs. Now, obviously, Democrats and Republicans don't see eye to eye on, certifying the results for Joe Biden. People like Ted Cruz on the Republican side, were fighting it earlier today. As we discussed earlier in this program, I kind of feel like some of the temperature on that's going to be turned down, and they may actually try to use this as a moment of unity, again, staring down the protesters in a sense by saying, you can't stop us from doing our work. That work was very divisive work. Republicans trying to say Biden wasn't the president, Democrats saying, of course, he will be on January 20th. So I'm not sure that exact conversation will continue with that level of sort of partisan vitriol, but we are expecting some action inside the Capitol later tonight, timing and substance of that all to be determined.
And just to keep going on what is an extraordinary news day, now Google has announced it's taking down from YouTube that Trump video as well. So it's not just Facebook anymore, Craig.
Yeah, and again, I know there is sort of a growing mood, even among many Republicans, that Donald Trump needs to answer for this, for what happened today. In that, obviously he himself did not storm the Capitol, but you might say gave aid and comfort to the people who did. And I've seen people like Karl Rove, the strategist for George W. Bush, Mick Mulvaney, former President Trump's former chief of staff, a former communications director for him, all saying this is wrong. This needs to stop. The president needs to step up. He needs to tell these people to stop it. And obviously Trump, did not do that. So I actually think some of the fissures that Donald Trump has had with the Republican Party through the 4 years of his presidency, boy, he doesn't have a lot of friends right now.
Right.
I mean, to put it simply.
Craig, thank you so much. That's our Washington Bureau Chief, Craig Gordon. We're going to be continuing coverage on Bloomberg Asia. This is Bloomberg.